Hi, this is Dave Belsky, your host of the Sunset Session, featured on WCBN. We have a special guest today, Kyle Kazan, the CEO of Glasshouse Group here in California. Kyle, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Glasshouse Group operates Glasshouse Farms, which is the largest cannabis greenhouse operational in California. Currently, I believe it's up there. Also 4 retail locations that do delivery, including Bud and Bloom, the pharmacy, and what is that one in LA?
The Pottery.
The Pottery, and also produces Glasshouse Farms branded flower, which will end up somewhere in the top 3 or 4 flower brands in the state this year, Field Extracts amongst other brands. So thank you for joining and fitting it in. Now, I always like to start with, what was your background before cannabis and before starting Glasshouse Group?
So how far back do you want me to go back?
Let's start off with your USC basketball star days, where you were all conference Pac-10.
Yeah. So for basketball fans back in the late 80s that remember USC, which was a 7th place in the Pac-10, you had to stay and eat all of your popcorn to see me play. I was more of a come in the game and mop up an already mopped up game. So yeah. But I played 3 years. 3 years for a Hall of Fame coach at USC.
Yeah, but I mean, everyone needs. It takes something to stay with a team when you're not getting play time, just to be part of the story.
Look, I had a ball. I did get a little bit of time here and there, and people would see me on CBS and call me up. And back then we couldn't text, and it was a really fun time. And I wouldn't trade it. I learned a lot from Coach Wrazel.
And then after basketball, faced with the real world, post-graduation, what did you do after college?
So I worked as an inner city special ed teacher down in South Central Los Angeles for 4 years. A little school. If you watch the movie Menace to Society, at the very opening, it shows my school as it goes into Jordan High School and Jordan Downs housing projects.
Wow. And then you became a police officer.
Yeah, but on the side I was doing, I had a t-shirt company because we had unrest back in April of '92, and I didn't understand why I'm passing all of these press conferences and our mayor and our council people, and they're doing ribbon cuttings, and then nothing happens. It was just placation of the folks in South Central that were so upset. And so we started, myself and my teacher's assistant, we actually started a company called Streetwise Clothes, and we had taggers who I thought really made some pretty cool art, put that onto shirts. And so we had it selling in a chain called Hot Topic. And
Hot Topic?
Yeah.
Popular with the teenagers.
Yeah, we were on Power 106, which was a big time.
Big boy in the morning?
It wasn't Big Boy in the morning. It was an afternoon or an evening show we were on. But so it was a really interesting idea, and it also I learned a lot of lessons about and became somewhat jaded about the government response and again placation of people to just get them to be quiet and get back into their place and so. But I was also buying real estate on the side because as a school teacher, you don't make a lot of money, and then they cut my pay 11% because we were in a recession, and so I just started buying some rental real estate and got into that, and then after 4 years, I was hired by the Torrance Police Department, so they doubled my salary from being a school teacher to now enforcing the law, and I was a Torrance police officer for 5 years from 1994 to 1999.
And as a Torrance police officer, a lot of what you saw, was enforcement against drug-related crimes.
Yeah, the American drug war still on in such a big way. And I led the department for 2 different 6-month periods. So for 20% of my time, I was making the most felony and the most misdemeanor arrests. And so and most of those were drug. Most of those were drug possession.
And at what point do you get disenfranchised with law enforcement and take in a different direction? So
I never got disenfranchised with law enforcement. The men and women out there, we need them. If you don't have law enforcement, enforcing laws in society, you have anarchy. You have 2 choices. That's pretty much it. And so, but but the drug war itself, that's what I became disenchanted about. Helping somebody, trying to make sure, if somebody stole a car or somebody put a gun to somebody's head or somebody killed somebody. I was at murder scenes and made arrests, arrested some people for 187 PC. That was gratifying. Taking somebody dangerous off the street was a good thing. But the drug war, I made less and less arrests as my career was kind of coming to an end because my businesses were growing and I just was having difficulty doing both. That was the conundrum I was in.
Sure. And then your business were property management, and that's where you got your kind of start as an entrepreneur, and over after leaving the police force, the property management business grew into beachfront property, which has how many units?
So we had purchased 250 units. I'd put partnerships together. My business partner that I met back then, 24 years ago, we started doing that, and once we had about 250 units, I actually took a pay cut to leave the police department and start a management company. It had about $20 million worth of real estate at the time. Today, that company manages about 7,500 units. I'm still the majority owner, even though I don't spend a lot of time focused there. And it managed about $2.8 billion worth of real estate.
Wow. Well, we'll come back to your story in a second, tie that into kind of present day events, but. Sure. But obviously a very unique background for someone running a modern, legal, recreational cannabis company in California, right?
100%. What I would tell you is the bridge was actually LEAP. LEAP is Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, is what it used to be. Now it's Law Enforcement Action Partnership. And it's basically retired, some active duty, but mainly retired law enforcement, so police, DAs, and judges. And what they do is they speak out. Back then it was against prohibition, against the drug war. That was the mission. They've broadened their mission to social justice and bettering law enforcement in society today. And so back in '08, I started speaking very publicly. Pissed off some of my police friends, frankly, but they knew me. The ones that knew me well, they knew I'll speak my mind. And I just wanted to speak out from my experience at what a failure, an absolute failure the drug war has been. And you brought up our CFO, who you kindly brought to us. You did a great job in helping to fill my company with great people at FlowerHire. But I told Derek, I'm like, hey man, we were talking. I go, watch The Wire from 2000 or 2001 on HBO. You will see. Tell me who the bad people are. Yeah. They're just people.
Right.
And at the end of the day, when I earned my badge and my wife pinned it on, it wasn't to save you from you. It was to save people from being victimized. But if you're going to put something in your body, I mean, it's just a slippery slope. Right. And it's so to me, that's where I spoke out, and I got a lot of credibility from being on Fox and CNN and things like that, so that when people started coming to me, asked me back in 2011, 2012, would I start investing in the space? And it was not just no, it was hell no. I'm like, the LAPD still has battle rams, and they will come to
shutting down things actively and turning off power and.
Oh, but I thought they would come to my house and basically take me to jail or feds, or because right. a lot of the cops didn't appreciate my point of view and being very public. So I was like a hard no, and I wanted to advocate against the war on drugs and legalize and regulate, and marijuana was first up. Now it's mushrooms, and I'm hoping that through what's going on in society today, that we actually have a good discussion about legalizing and regulating all drugs.
Yeah, which 20 years ago, when you started being vocal about it as part of LEAP, it was a radical thought.
Big time. Big time radical.
And I'm sure your former law enforcement or your law enforcement friends, but also other people in your life were like, what's going on here? What are you doing? Because
one of my brothers was sheriff's deputy who just recently retired. He still hates that. And what I can't seem to get is my friends that appreciate guns, and I appreciate the Second Amendment, hate weed, hate the drugs. And the folks on the weed side and the drug side, and I love them too, and and been fighting for legalization, they hate guns. And it's like, everybody sort of wants the same thing. We just start bridging society to look, and I'll be the first one, Dave, to tell you, look, I know your lovely family, you have kids. I don't want to see any of your kids using heroin. I don't want to see them using tobacco. But if they choose to do it, it's there. Whether it's legal or not, it's widely available. Right. And we have this epidemic of people dying of opioid deaths because they're getting fentanyl. And at the end of the day, if they could buy legally regulated heroin, it's the least worst idea. Still not good, but what we have now is not working. We spent over $1 trillion on the drug war, and we are the most jailing population on the planet. More than China.
For nonviolent offenses.
For nonviolent offenses.
Where you're only harming yourself.
Right. And then you can't vote, although some of that's changing.
Yeah.
You're disenfranchised. You can't get public housing. You can't get this. You can't get that. Yeah. And then, that person may have kids, and now who's going to take care of the kids? It's just bad on every level of society. So I'm hoping, as we see that marijuana legalization the world has not ended. In fact, the world's gotten a lot better. And I'm hoping that we see this just, change across society.
Well, I always look at the cannabis industry right now in 2020 as there's not a better opportunity to create jobs and create tax revenue for cities and states and the federal government and people that and the government's going to need it to continue to provide the level of service, considering what's happening in the world today. The other part of that has been, again, there's been no bigger example of systemic racism in this country than the war on drugs in terms of how it's been played out. And I think that, for you and this current bubbling up of sentiment against police officers, a lot of that is rooted in having to enforce the war on drugs. And not, in police departments having to do their job that is made by politicians and lawmakers, and they're the ones that have to be that enforcement arm.
Look, I don't like war. I was against the war in Iraq. People thought I was crazy. Now all of a sudden that seems to be just like marijuana. But I at no point ever felt any animosity towards any soldier. Anybody who's out there putting their life on the line, even if I think the war is misguided, I support them. And the same thing with law enforcement. When I call 911, when anyone calls 911, and I used to work in South Central where it is dangerous, and the murders going up, they're not going up in Bel Air. They're not going up in parts of the city where that's not allowed. But it's okay. And the politicians will speak a good game, but they're full of it. It's okay for people to die in South Central. It happened back when I was there, and it's happening today. That's where it spikes. And so when you hear defund the police and they start saying, oh, we're going to shift, I am agreeing with shifting, 100%. Shift law enforcement into just where we need the laws enforced. But give them proper funding and measure it like you would any other business to say, the folks in South Central, when they call 911, someone should be there in minutes. Yep. That's how it was in Torrance. And that's where, you and I are neighbors. That's what we get. And it's just not acceptable for poor communities which are communities of color, to not get the proper policing. Your point is a very, very good one, though, Dave, in that we can't blame police officers for enforcing bad laws. We should be, out in front of politicians' homes and saying, change these laws. They shouldn't be on the books. Now police don't arrest for cannabis. Right. Because they do what they're instructed to do. Right. And so at the end of the day, let's not blame the law enforcers. Let's blame our politicians and get them to do the right thing.
Right. And I think there's no better time to push that narrative forward than in 2020 and what's happening. But I think that the how do we solve this narrative hasn't necessarily there's no consensus in the media or anything like that. And this is a major thing that will not solve it, but work to solve, these structural challenges and societal challenges that we're all dealing with and aware of, is rolling these things back and then figuring out support for these communities that have been affected by this. And whether it's community owned and operated retail dispensaries, there's a lot of potential there. But if we're talking about improvement from here and taking advantage of society being, woke as it is in 2020, hopefully more politicians start, articulating that properly as part of the solution and the path forward. And I think it comes down to constituents to give them the message. So I completely agree with that. So now you mentioned staying out of cannabis from a business standpoint until it looked like California seems like was going to go on the path of legalization, right? And obviously being a vocal, proponent of cannabis, you got to a point where I'm sure even in the medical days, in the Prop 215 era, opportunities were coming your way, right? Do you want to invest in this grow, or let's go in on this license with your real estate background, you'll get it. But you're like, I'm not getting involved. And what was that moment when you're like, it's now time to try to bring my entire world together, what I believe in, what I'm good at, and how I make money, right? What was that moment where you're like, I'm going to go full into this industry?
It happened over a period of time, but Prop 19 was California's chance to go from Prop 215 to Prop 64 before anybody else, and that was 2011. And so I was on a lot of different.
Why did that fail?
Soros came in with the money late. It was again Richard Lee, who has Oaksterdam University, put in $1 million. Courageous man, Richard. And they were trying to convince Soros to come in, and he was a funder of the Drug Policy Alliance. He just was late to the dance. And look, Dianne Feinstein, who needs to retire, she came out heavy against it, and I was a lot of times the counterbalance. So was the DA, so was the sheriff, and I know the former DA Steve Cooley, and I knew Lee Baca. I know Lee Baca, and I kind of expected from them, but I was really disappointed in Senator Feinstein flying in here and really pushing it, and it was sort of last minute, not the funding quite there, and it just couldn't quite get over. But to answer your question, in 2013, I saw Colorado and Washington become the first. They passed their Prop 19s, their Prop 64, and so I started going to Denver a lot that year, and I was just looking at. Anytime I'm going to invest somewhere, whether it's in Europe or whether it's in Asia or pecan farms in Georgia, place where I've put my money to work, I like to get my shoes dirty. I like to fully understand what is going on, and I felt like this was going to be. We're going to see 1933, which was the end of alcohol prohibition. We're going to see it all over again, and so it was somewhere. The aha moment, I would say, was 2013. I felt, okay, I got to understand this. I couldn't quite invest in Colorado because at the time they didn't want out-of-state money. So I couldn't quite make it work, and I'm a pretty creative person. But it was at that point in 2014 where I said to the team, guys, we're going to go back to California, and we are going to focus here. It's what we know. I'm a lifelong California person. I'm well connected politically. I've got a lot of business experience. I have a lot of investors that have made a lot of money, and I said, let's see what we can do. Let's see if we can go do some good, be impact investors.